Hi everyone, hope everybody's having a good day. I wanted to share some Torah with you in preparation for Shavuot, in preparation for this weekend, and the very important day in the Jewish calendar. We read about the Har Sinai experience, and when we do so, we read the following verse, the following pasuk. Vayis'u mirfidim, vayavo midbar Sinai, v'yachanu b'midbar, vayichan sham Yisrael neged ahar. And they traveled from a place called Refidim, and they went to the desert area referred to as the Sinai, and they camped there in the desert. And there they were entrenched, neged hahar, across from the mountain. The Orach Chaim, famous commentary, who's from Morocco, Chaim ibn Attar, he says that this verse is the key to understanding the Sinai experience, the giving of the Torah. And as this verse precedes the giving of the Torah, it holds the secret. It holds certain clues as to how we can experience receiving the Torah once again. The first question is, why is the pasuk telling us where the Jewish people came from? We know that they were encamped in a place called Refidim. Rashi, on that verse, says not only did they leave Refidim in terms of the physical sense, in terms of leaving the geographic location, but there was a certain change, a certain alteration to who they were as a people. You see, in Refidim, there was a battle. They were attacked by Amalek. And not only did they leave that weakness behind, not only did they leave that type of defeat behind and their lack of confidence behind, but there was also a place in which they were complaining to Moshe Rabbeinu. And as the Jewish people were wont to do at the time, they complained and they showed a lack of belief that God would be able to provide for their needs. And so when it says in the verse that they left Refidim, it doesn't just mean that they traveled away from there, but they had a certain resolve to them when they left. They did a teshuvah, they did repentance, in order to make sure that they worked on themselves so that they would be worthy of receiving the Torah. That process, that development of character, is what we are referring to when we say that they left the area of Refidim. The Orach Chaim takes this idea, and the commentary states that the first clue to understanding how one becomes worthy or able to access the Torah is to have sacrifice, self-sacrifice, to work on one's character, to work on one's character to the extent that it might even be bothersome, or it might even be uncomfortable. Here they were a certain way in Refidim, and they changed. And if somebody wants to receive the Torah, so somebody has to work on their character to perfect their actions and who they are in order to accept the Torah. And that's very much a part of what we're doing for 3 days prior to Shavuot. The Shlosheh Simei Hagbala, the 3 days prior to Shavuot, is all about preparation, all about being mentally prepared for what's to come. So the second clue as to how we prepare for Shavuot comes from the very next words. It says, Vayavohu midbar Sinai, that they came to that desert area of the Sinai. V'yachanu b'midbar, and they encamped in the midbar, in the desert. We know it's a desert. Why is the verse telling us that it's a desert? So the Orach Chaim states that the reason why it says that they're in a desert, even though we already know they're there, is because when a person's in a vast desert, this vast expanse, a person is humbled by where he is and his part in this world, his part on earth. So a person needs humility. A A person needs to view that he's just a small part of this world and of this universe. Even though when we often think that we're the center of it. The person imagines himself to be in a desert, or what it was like to be in a desert. And there's a certain humility that might overcome him. That's the second key to receiving the Torah. Is this specifically the aspect of our character of working on our humility. And lastly, it says, Vayichan Sham Yisrael Neged Ahar. It says that the Jewish people encamped across from the mountain. However, it says it in the singular. It says that the Jewish people were one. Their unity was strong, and that was necessary in order to acquire the Torah. So the three prerequisites are to work on one's character, to work extremely hard on one's character. The second prerequisite is to humble oneself. In order to acquire Torah, a person should imagine themselves being in this vast desert, which can be overpowering. And lastly, the last prerequisite is to make sure that one is at ease, is doing well with one's neighbor, that we are unified as a community and in our society. When it comes to working on oneself, when it comes to making sure that we have the strength necessary to endure, to work on our character, it makes sense to think of the following episode. Think of the following story in Tanakh. One thinks of Yaakov. Yaakov in his prime was forced to leave his home. Yaakov was forced out by Esav. Yaakov was fearing for his life. He was afraid that he would be killed by Esav after the sale of the Bechor, of the birthright. And he left his house. And for 14 years, he learned in the yeshiva of Shem Ve'ever. He studied for 14 years. And Chazal teach us that he didn't sleep for those 14 years. Whether that means he never had a full night's sleep, or whether that means his head never saw a pillow. But what it certainly means is that he had this fight within him. That he was determined at all costs to acquire Torah, to understand Torah, to be absolutely dedicated to Torah. And even if it meant going through the difficulty of not having any sleep. Yaakov is our model for trying to determine what it means to fight for one's acquisition of Torah, to be a part of Torah. When it comes to humility, we need not look any further than Hillel as our example. Hillel came from Golos, he came from Bavel. When he came from Bavel to the land of Israel, he was asked a question. And certain times when Hillel answered the question, he didn't have the humility involved to think that perhaps there were others who could teach him something as well. And once he made that initial mistake, there was occasion where he forgot an answer to a question that was posed to him. And after that occasion, he became most humble rabbi, to the extent that the Talmud refers to him as the ideal rabbi of the Talmud to learn about anava, to learn about humility. We see that the opposite of humility has that effect as well in a similar story. Moshe Rabbeinu, following the victory of Midian, saw that the spoils were taken by the Jewish people, and he was very upset that the women of Midian, who were the ones who were responsible for the sin of the Jewish people, who enticed the Jewish people, and thus the Jewish people suffered greatly because of that. He got very angry about it. And when they asked him what to do with the vessels that they had taken, he didn't respond. He didn't teach the halacha. And Chazal teach us that the reason why that's the case is because Moshe temporarily couldn't remember it. Couldn't remember the halacha. And the reason why was because of his anger. Chazal learn out that a person's anger, the person focusing so much on his being distraught, is not able to properly learn, to properly give halakhic guidance. And they go on to say that this isn't a punishment from God, but it's a reality of man. That when a person gets angry, he can't possibly focus on knowledge outside of himself. And that's a reality of a person who has an anger problem, or who is in a state of anger. And lastly, a final example for the need to have unity in order to accept the Torah as a people. I'd like to share with you a story from the Gemara. The Gemara talks about a time of Yehuda Bar Ilai, when the times of Rabbi Yehuda Bar Ilai, they were so poor. But nevertheless, there was a great sense of achdus, a great sense of unity. So much so that 6 people, and as the Talmud says, 6 students could share one blanket. How is that possible for 6 people to share one blanket? And the answer is that unlike the norm, where somebody might pull out the blanket to cover himself a little bit more, to pull out the blanket to cover, make sure he doesn't get a cold, they were so concerned for each other that they were only concerned about making sure the other person was covered. And as such, they were able to make do with what they had, to only use this one blanket, because of the feelings that they had for each other. As such, because of this unity, there was great success in the spreading of Torah throughout the land. We see these 3 prerequisites and we think about ourselves. We think about what we're about to experience this weekend. And the way to prepare as we try to become worthy of receiving the Torah once again is to see what in our character needs to be worked on in order to stand at that mountain, to stand at the foot of that mountain and hear the commandments. We think about the humility that's necessary in order to make sure that we don't think too much of ourselves, of our own rationalizations, of our own philosophies, and we're able to consider those of God's and those of Torah and those of our rabbis and our sages. And lastly, if we really want to be serious about accepting the Torah, it's going to require the introspection that results in a unity, a certain brotherhood, a certain sisterhood, which we all feel together as one community, as we strive to dedicate ourselves to the acquisition, to the kinyan of receiving the Torah. Thank you. Everybody have a good Yontif, and good luck on their preparation.